For the last couple of years, the Nexus has established itself as the place where you can get the essential Android experience, but it fell short of actually taking on all of the established flagships of those particular years. Is this the year that the Nexus finally puts the pieces together? Well, we're about to find out because it is Joshua Vergara from Android Authority, and here it is, the Nexus 6P. Design takes on a whole new outlook as Huawei is now at the helm of creating the premium of the two Nexus devices. We'll start off with the metal body, which already makes this phone feel sturdier and has a higher build quality than plenty of other phones out there. And over on the sides, they are flat, which makes this phone pretty easy to grip. Over on the right side are all of the buttons, including a textured power button that makes it pretty easy to find, and up top is a headphone jack that is opposite the USB Type-C port. Now this port is still taking some getting used to for us here at Android Authority, because when you're trying to charge this phone, whether at home or on the go, you just have to make sure that you actually have the correct cord. Moving to the front, we have the 5.7-inch AMOLED display that is flanked by dual front-facing speakers, which also perform really well and give the phone a bit of symmetry for the front. But now we can finally get to the back, where some of the new additions are truly found. First off though, we have the Nexus logo, which is dead center in landscape, and it has been painted right into the body, and we still love it. Above that is the fingerprint reader that is lined with a shiny circle. And then finally this black bar up top. Now, in the actual product renders of this device, it might not look that great, but when you get it in the flesh, it actually kind of grows on you. This bar is where the camera, the laser autofocus, and the flash can be found. And the best part about it is that it doesn't really protrude out that much, so it really isn't that much of an eyesore. One-handed usage will take a bit of a hit because of how large the screen is and thus the body. But the sides are flat, which means you'll be able to keep a pretty good grip on this phone. And also the metal body allows for this to have a sturdiness to it that is definitely felt, and it just screams high build quality. Previous Nexus devices have taken cues from that manufacturer's past offerings, but Huawei has managed to not only create a phone that is uniquely exquisite, but they also benefit from a lesser known identity here in the States, so not too many people know what Huawei is capable of, and the Nexus 6P is a wonderful showcase for them. Quality continues to reign as the Nexus 6P brings a very great display. At 5.7 inches in the size, you also get Quad HD resolution, that's 2560 by 1440. Now the AMOLED display also brings higher saturation in the colors along with better black levels, so the contrast is very good as well. In practice, we don't have any problems no matter what we're doing on this display. The text is definitely very sharp whether you're doing work or play, and the colors really benefit, especially when you're using media. The only real problem we had here was with the ambient display. Now there is a feature where a small but very effective window will show up showing you your current notifications, and with an AMOLED display it is quite power saving, but it's kind of hard to actually trigger it. You can pretty much just pick up the phone and it will turn on, but there are no other ways to turn it on, and it doesn't stay on for very long. Once we get underneath that surface, however, we get the processing package we've kind of come to know really well this year. The Snapdragon 810 with 3GB of RAM. Now 3GB of RAM is the main thing here, as you'll be able to load a lot of applications, many at the same time, but ultimately we give a lot of credit to the stock and thus not so feature-rich version of Android you're getting here in Marshmallow. Going through all the home screens and all the applications, and even incessant switching through the recent app screen really went through just swimmingly. And gaming has been really fun on here as well. For everything from sprite-based gaming to 3D gaming, we had really no problems on here, and it has been a treat. So once again, the Nexus proves that it isn't just sheer power that allows for great performance, but a marriage of that power with the optimizations in the software that are needed to properly take advantage of it. Hardware additions are a big focus for the Nexus this year, and it all starts with Nexus Imprint. That rear-mounted fingerprint reader works really well on here, and if you have any memory of good Huawei fingerprint readers, it shows once again here in the Nexus 6P. Setting up a fingerprint is really easy, and it's even easier to just unlock and wake the device by using usually your index finger. The best part about it is that you're going to just get straight into the home screens. You're not going to get a lock screen and then the animation to get into the home screens. You just put your finger on the back and you're ready to go. Now we return to the front-facing speakers, which have been really great for everything from media to gaming. Now what's great about them is that they provide a little bit of body while having very loud sound. But the best part is that you can just use these for mostly gaming, which was our experience, and you don't really have to have headphones on all the time anymore. Speaking of sound, call quality was really good on the Nexus 6P, about as good as it should be, and we tested it on the T-Mobile and Project Fi networks. There weren't really any dropped calls, and there were no complaints on either end of the call. Also, speaking of those networks, this phone will work on all of the major carriers in the US, so that kind of takes the guesswork out of making sure you have the right version for your particular cellular network. Unfortunately, storage options don't include expandability, which can be a bummer for a lot of people, but at least the 32GB base model is up to today's standards. If you are able to shell out a little bit more for the 64GB, however, we would definitely recommend you do that. And finally, in battery, we get a huge boost, not just in the capacity of the unit inside of this phone, but also because of a new feature in Android Marshmallow called Doze. Now, Doze pretty much requires you to have the phone on a flat surface. It's not going to work in your pocket because the sensors are still being triggered. When all the sensors are left untriggered, then apps are put into a deep sleep mode, where the only notifications you'll get is based upon higher priority apps. And as you can see in this graph right here, I have some flatter lines in the graph, which was basically when Doze was working. It basically means that the standby time is going to be really high because the battery won't be draining a whole lot due to these deep sleep modes that the apps are going through. There's kind of a lesson here for all phone users. If you want good battery life out of your phone, then pretty much the main thing you have to do is, well, not use it. But thankfully, Doze is able to leverage those times when you're not using it and make it so that this phone can definitely go the distance. Even considering my music and podcast listening, I was able to get about 4.5 hours on average of screen on time, which I still think is pretty great considering my usage. But the best part about this is that the battery is really easy to charge up. But there's one problem with it. You're not going to use Qualcomm quick charging on here anymore. So if you happen to have any batteries, external batteries, or chargers that are supposed to use that, you're not going to be able to use it with the Nexus 6P. But using the included USB Type-C cord and the plug adapter that leverages the higher power current that USB Type-C supports, you will be able to charge this from 0 to 100 in under 90 minutes. Now, if you have like 10 or 15 minutes in the middle of your day to just plug this thing in, you'll get just enough battery to get through the bigger portion of the rest of your day. So really, there's no problem when it comes to power on here, especially when the battery already goes for a long time. Now, if there's one place where the Nexus devices tended to kind of fall short, it was in the camera. But this year, the Nexus has to contend with what has been a pretty incredible year for smartphone cameras. And this year, they have risen to the challenge. A 12.3 megapixel shooter on the back there also comes in at 1.5 microns. Now, that sounds a little bit minuscule, but what that basically means is that the sensor on this phone is bigger than most of the ones found out there. And unfortunately, that means there is no optical image stabilization on here, but that's something you'll mostly see in videos with jittery footage than you'll see in photos. That said, the app doesn't really provide too many options, unfortunately. It's a pretty good auto app, but you don't get a whole lot of manual controls, and as far as modes go for photo, you can get HDR Plus on auto, and then you have panorama, lens blur, and photosphere, and not a whole lot else after that. In video, you do get 4K video recording, but we had more fun with the slow motion recording at 120 or 240 frames per second at 720 resolution. Now, image quality was actually pretty great, with details captured quite well, despite there being a noticeable but very small amount of noise reduction still at play. Low light situations still require at least a little bit of light so you can differentiate the subject from the rest of the surroundings, but at least here in the Nexus 6P, they don't just show up as a big ball of fuzz. Overall, photos benefit from a noticeable but somewhat subtle amount of saturation, so the colors are punched out a little bit. But the Nexus 6P does cheat a little bit because it has that AMOLED display that provides even more saturation to the eye. Basically, the results are just that little bit different when you get them on a computer screen. Panoramas were stitched together without too many problems, and HDR Plus was a mode that we were pretty happy to use most of the time, but we did find it to be a little bit moody. In some pictures it would raise the shadows, and in other pictures it would lower the highlights, and we could never really tell when we were shooting it what was going to happen. But there's one thing for sure, HDR Plus definitely punches out the colors even more. Overall, we're really happy with the Nexus cameras, mostly because now you don't have to feel like you're settling for these cameras when you compare them to the other flagships available in Android today. And finally, we have Android Marshmallow, which brings the crux of the Nexus experience, the latest and greatest of Android, with updates for the foreseeable future. For what it is right now, Android is essentially everything that you know right now about Android. It has the home screens, Google Now is over on the side, and of course you have the app drawer, which is the first place you see a change. It's now of a vertical scroll, but it also has a line up top for your 4 most used applications. We would have liked an extra line up there, but that one line is still pretty useful. Now, this new version of Android doesn't bring that many super flashy new features, but there is one that is kind of flashy, and that is Google Now on Tap. Now on Tap doesn't really replace Google Now, but it does allow you to search for anything that is currently displayed on the screen by just holding the home button. And what you're searching for should be in text and very plainly seen on the screen. Now, it is kind of moody also because Now on Tap might not pull the information that you're expecting it to pull, but at the same time, it's just sort of a feature that works really well when it does. The rest of the features are less flashy but are just as important. We already featured Doze earlier in the battery section, and then after that you have app permissions. Now, app permissions can be found in the settings area where all of the different features of the phone that applications might access are listed, and you can change whether you want any apps to do so or not. But when you first fire up an app and the first time it tries to access a feature of the phone, the app permissions will ask you if you do actually want it to do so. If there's anybody out there who really wants some extra security when it comes to Android, all of the app permissions in the new version of Android should be able to bring that little bit of peace of mind for you. Of course, the main reason to get the Nexus in software is to get the latest and most optimized version of Android, and it really shows here. Small tweaks to the animations make Android feel that much smoother, but overall the experience is still incredibly snappy. And users will be able to enjoy the best that Android has to offer as it is being released. The Nexus 6P starts at $499, which is less than typical flagships, but is definitely a premium price for a Nexus phone. It might be a pretty penny, but at least you're getting a pretty great experience in a properly premium pretty body. Now, some people might scoff at the price, saying that the Nexus was supposed to be an affordable flagship device, but that was kind of broken last year when we had the Nexus 6, which brought a really high price despite not necessarily meeting that level of value. But this year, the 6P is like finding a middle ground. A phone that truly looks and feels high-end, but has enough to boast about underneath that shell, including a camera that finally does justice to the word flagship. If you want Android at its absolute purest state, either of these Nexus phones will give you what you want. But when you're thinking of a truly high-end, flagship, pure Android phone, then the Nexus 6P is the one that takes that crown, and thus our accolades. When it's as good at running a marathon as it is at running a sprint, we pay attention. And as an Android phone fully capable of satisfying just about anyone, this one is definitely worthy of your consideration. As always, thank you guys very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this full review of the Nexus 6P. It is a Nexus device through and through, but it also manages to be a flagship, a true flagship, through and through. And that might be what we love most about it. Keep it tuned here for more about the Nexus 6P and the 5X, of which Lon has already done his review, and you can see that over on the side along with more from my colleagues in Android. You can stick around by subscribing to our channel and dropping likes on our videos because we love to see those thumbs up. And of course, we have the Android Authority podcast discussing topics in Android every single week. The app is available up there as well, and it is your gateway to all of our content here at AndroidAuthority.com because we are your source for all things Android.